It's very delicious to act with beautiful men. Some of them are in the realm of fantasy. Al Pacino.
She was once the most dangerous woman in Hollywood, not for what she did, but for what she refused to become. At 93, Angie Dickinson has nothing left to lose, and no more silence to protect.
John Wayne, Dean Martin, Walter Brennan, Ricky Nelson, this was a men's movie. Were they all good to you?
For decades, she played the game, smiled through betrayal, and survived a world built to break women like her. But now, the gloves are off. She's naming names. 5 men who were once icons. 5 men who used love, power, and lies to take everything from her. This isn't a tell-all. It's a reckoning. And the truth isn't glamorous. It's brutal, cold, and long overdue. The man who sang love but silenced her voice. Before the spotlight, before the fame, Angie Dickinson was a girl with nothing but a notebook full of poetry and a hunger to be more than what the world expected from a girl born in North Dakota. No formal training, no family legacy, just raw ambition, a hypnotic stare, and the kind of quiet fire that made casting agents stop mid-sentence. She wasn't loud. She didn't play coy. She let her presence speak, and that made her dangerous. In the Hollywood of the 1950s, danger had no place in a woman's career unless it came in lingerie and lipstick. When she met Frank Sinatra, the world labeled them golden. But golden things can still burn you. Frank didn't love her the way the magazines claimed. He owned her. At first, he courted her like a prince. Flowers sent daily. Intimate dinners where the waiters barely breathed. Moments that felt cinematic, larger than life. For a while, Angie believed it. Believed that maybe she could have both, love and freedom. Then the curtain dropped. He didn't hit. He didn't scream. But every time she took a role that brought her closer to independence, he took something from her. When she accepted a part that required a kiss, the script vanished. When she signed a deal he didn't approve of, she came home to broken photographs and silence that chilled the walls. She wasn't his lover. She was his possession. Hollywood whispered about them. They said she had it made. But no one saw the fear behind her eyes when she stepped onto a set. Every smile had to be measured. Every co-star approved. And when she rebelled, even quietly, the consequences were swift and surgical. One call from Frank, and producers backed out. One night of defiance, and 3 roles disappeared. The turning point wasn't explosive. It was quiet. A single phone call at 2 in the morning. Angie had just landed a lead role in a film the critics were already buzzing about. But Frank didn't care about her triumph. He called the director, calm and cool, and delivered a message that froze Angie's future. Keep her in that film, and your career ends here. By sunrise, her role was gone. No explanation given. No apology offered. It was in that silence she understood what Frank truly loved. Control. Not her. For years she stayed. Not out of love, not out of fear, but out of the quiet hope that the man she met in the beginning would return. He never did. He became a ghost with a grip. Even after they ended, his influence lingered. Doors closed behind her like a whisper. Casting calls went unreturned. She was still Angie Dickinson, but no longer the darling of the town. She had been marked, and Hollywood never forgot. Still, she didn't speak. Not then. She let him live out his legacy untouched. Because that's what women were trained to do. Move on. Stay silent. Carry it like a wound you never show. But wounds fester. And at 93, she's done hiding the scar. Frank Sinatra, the man who made the world swoon, made her disappear one silent command at a time. He didn't need fists. He had a telephone and a voice people feared more than truth. And after him came a man who broke something even deeper, not her spirit, but her role as a mother. A man who didn't just walk away from her, but from a child who never had a choice. Angie once lost her career, but what came next nearly cost her soul, the husband who turned his back on their daughter. For most of her life, Angie Dickinson carried herself with elegance that masked the weight she bore. On screen, she was magnetic, commanding attention without having to speak loudly. Off-screen, her silence was often mistaken for peace, when in fact, it was a kind of survival. She had mastered the art of hiding pain behind perfect poise because in her world, emotion was weakness and vulnerability was a liability. But behind all the polished interviews and magazine covers was a woman holding together something broken. Not her career, not her pride, but her family. Or more precisely, what remained of it. When Angie met Burt Bacharach, it felt like fate had offered her a reprieve. The world saw two stars from opposite ends of the entertainment spectrum coming together in harmony. He was a composer who made orchestras sing, and she was a woman who didn't need background music to leave an impression. The media fell in love with their union, calling it a storybook pairing. Their wedding was a spectacle of glamour and charm, and for a time, the illusion held. But inside that home, beyond the elegant Beverly Hills facade, there was a silence that only a woman living alone in love could recognize. At first, Angie made every excuse. Burt was a creative soul, a man whose genius came at the price of unpredictability. Long hours at the studio, last-minute trips for inspiration, sessions that stretched into the early hours of the morning. She told herself it was all part of the artistic life. But even before their daughter was born, Angie began to notice the absence of intimacy. It wasn't just physical distance. It was the feeling that she was no longer seen, that she had become a fixture in his life rather than a partner in it. The arrival of their daughter Nikki should have changed everything. For Angie, it did. The moment she held her, something shifted permanently inside her heart. But for Burt, the change brought discomfort. Nikki was not an ordinary child. She was diagnosed early with a developmental disorder that, at the time, few doctors understood, and even fewer people talked about. Angie was thrown into a whirlwind of medical terms and therapy sessions, while Burt seemed more preoccupied with deadlines and tour schedules than the challenges they now faced as parents. The first sign that Burt would not rise to the occasion came during a hospital visit. Nikki had been admitted for observation after a particularly severe episode. Angie called Burt from the hospital corridor, her hands trembling, her voice tired. He answered the phone, but said only one thing before hanging up. He asked if this would delay his flight to Europe. In that moment, she realized he was never going to be the kind of father Nikki needed. Angie bore the weight alone. She arranged the appointments, studied the medications, learned to navigate a world that rarely made space for children like Nikki. She gave up roles, declined interviews, and retreated from Hollywood's spotlight to become a mother in full. It wasn't a decision made from regret. It was made from necessity, because Nikki was not just her child, she was her entire world. And while Angie's world was being rebuilt around caretaking and sacrifice, Burt's world seemed to go on uninterrupted. He didn't argue, he didn't resist. He simply disappeared into a rhythm of avoidance. He poured his energy into music, surrounded himself with praise, and floated through award ceremonies and concerts with a smile that betrayed no sense of burden. Angie tried to speak to him, to ask for help, to explain the depth of exhaustion that comes with parenting a child with special needs. But every plea was met with polite disinterest or distant promises that never materialized. The most devastating betrayal came not in a tabloid or a headline, but in the quiet cruelty of a moment that should have meant something. Nikki required a specialized form of care, one that needed Bert's signature to authorize payment. Angie left him 3 voicemails and sent 2 handwritten letters. When he finally picked up the phone, she barely got the request out before he interrupted. His voice was calm, almost indifferent. He said, "Don't call me again unless she's dead." And then he hung up. That wasn't just the end of a conversation. That was the end of hope. Angie kept going because she had no other choice. She shielded Nikki from the loneliness, never letting her daughter feel the emotional vacancy left by a father who could write symphonies but couldn't return a phone call. She never spoke publicly about the pain. She didn't go to the press, didn't write a memoir filled with accusations. She protected Bert's reputation even as he betrayed their family, because that was the role she had learned to play. The silent woman, the strong one, the one who endures without ever asking for acknowledgement. Their marriage ended quietly in 1981. The press called it amicable. Reporters used words like mature and graceful to describe the separation, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the nights Angie spent pacing with a crying child in her arms while Bert was on a yacht with another woman. They didn't know about the mornings she woke up to an empty bed and an even emptier promise that things would get better. Worse than the abandonment was the betrayal during Nikki's earliest years. Angie later discovered that while she was pregnant, Bert had already begun an affair. It wasn't a fling. It was a relationship that he carried out with deliberate secrecy and shocking arrogance. The other woman had even been inside their home, laughing with him in the kitchen while Angie slept down the hall. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was a moral failure so deep that Angie could never find the words to forgive it. For years, she tried to keep Nikki sheltered from the truth. But children know when love is missing. They feel it even when it isn't spoken. Nikki grew up with a mother who gave her everything and a father who was a myth. And when she eventually passed away in her 40s, after a life spent struggling to be understood, Bert didn't attend the service. He didn't send flowers. He didn't make a call. Angie stood there alone, reading a eulogy to a church filled with strangers, while the man who had helped bring Nikki into the world vanished from it once again. And yet, Angie stayed quiet. For decades, she said nothing. But now, at 93, she no longer owes the world her silence. She no longer protects those who discarded her when she needed them most. Burt Bacharach may have written songs that touched millions, but to Angie, he will always be the man who turned his back on a daughter who never asked for fame, only love. This was not the story the world expected from its golden couple. This was not the marriage that magazine spreads promised. This was a woman watching a man walk away from responsibility with a shrug, while she stayed behind to carry the weight of an entire life. And yet, Angie endured. But what happens when the next man in her life isn't a lover or a husband, but a kingmaker in Hollywood, one with the power to decide who works, who fades, and who vanishes overnight? What happens when the cost of saying no to the wrong man isn't heartbreak, but career death? Angie's next chapter isn't about love. It's about fear. Not the kind that bruises skin, but the kind that buries dreams. And now, she's ready to reveal the name of the man who did just that. The gatekeeper who erased her career. In Hollywood, power doesn't always come in the form of a spotlight or a headline. Sometimes, It comes from the shadows. From the man who never steps in front of the camera, but sits quietly behind the scenes, deciding who rises and who fades. Angie Dickinson learned that too late. Because in her prime, she believed that talent would protect her, that fame would shield her from the games men played in back rooms and hotel suites. But she was wrong. One name, one man, one quiet rejection. That was all it took to erase her from the very world she helped build. His name was Jack Webb. To the public, he was a television pioneer, a master of realism who brought grit and integrity to American screens. He created hits that defined a generation, produced shows that shaped the cultural landscape, and built a reputation as a no-nonsense genius who elevated the medium. To young actresses, he was a gatekeeper. To Angie Dickinson, he was something worse. A reminder that no woman in Hollywood was ever truly safe, no matter how powerful she seemed. Their connection began in the early years of her television career. Jack was casting a new crime drama, and Angie was being considered for a recurring role. They met in his office, surrounded by scripts and awards, the walls lined with photographs of stars who owed their careers to his favor. Jack spoke in short sentences, clipped and efficient, with the air of a man who didn't waste time. He complimented her performance in a recent television special, mentioned how she stood out from the crowd, how she had something different in her eyes. At first, Angie felt optimistic. The audition had gone well. The chemistry with the lead actor was undeniable. She left the meeting feeling like something big was about to happen. But then, late that same night, she received a call. It wasn't from Jack. It was from someone on his staff, a producer who delivered the message without hesitation. The role was no longer available. No explanation, no apology, just a flat statement that she was no longer needed. Angie didn't understand. She hadn't stumbled in the audition. She hadn't missed a cue. Her agent had called earlier that same afternoon saying things looked promising. So what changed? The answer came quietly, over dinner with a friend who worked behind the scenes. He leaned in close, voice low, and told her the truth. Jack had made an advance. It wasn't crude. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, the way powerful men test the boundaries. Angie had declined politely, thinking her professionalism would speak louder than anything else. But Jack didn't take rejection well, especially from a woman he saw as rising too fast, shining too brightly. Within 24 hours, 3 of her upcoming roles had evaporated. Projects she had been negotiating for weeks. Meetings that had been confirmed suddenly vanished from the calendar. No one would say why. No one would return her calls. The silence was coordinated. And that's when she knew. It hadn't been a bad performance or a change in script. It had been one decision. One man, one punishment. What made it worse was that Jack never confronted her. He never shouted or argued. He simply acted, quietly, efficiently, as if removing her from the Hollywood circuit was as easy as crossing a name off a list. She became invisible, not to the fans or the public, but to the very machinery that kept an actress working. Casting directors stopped reaching out. Studios began to offer her smaller parts, or roles that insulted her legacy. She had been a leading lady. Now she was being offered background appearances, one-line cameos, mothers of characters half her age. And through it all, Jack continued to rise. His shows won more awards. His influence grew. No one questioned why Angie's star had suddenly dimmed. They assumed she had chosen to step back, maybe to focus on family, or to avoid the stress of celebrity life. The truth was too dangerous to speak aloud. In the world they lived in, calling out a man like Jack Webb wasn't just risky. It was professional self-harm. Angie didn't speak then, not because she was afraid, but because she knew no one would listen. Hollywood didn't punish powerful men for quiet sabotage. It rewarded them with development deals and creative control. She couldn't afford to lose more than she already had. So she smiled for the cameras. She answered questions with grace. She let the world believe she was taking a break, even as she watched her career slowly suffocate. It wasn't just the loss of work that haunted her. It was the realization that everything she had built, every line she had memorized, every risk she had taken on screen, could be undone in a moment by a man she barely knew. She had once thought that her name meant something, that her performances had carved a place for her in the history of American television. But now, she saw the truth. Fame was conditional. Success was temporary. And respect was never guaranteed, not when it was being negotiated behind her back. Years passed. Jack Webb eventually faded from the headlines. He died in 1982, still revered by critics, still hailed as a pioneer. He was given a hero's farewell. His shows were rebroadcast as tributes. Books were written about his legacy. But Angie never forgot what he did, not because she wanted revenge, but because silence was how it kept happening. She remained graceful. She never gave an interview trashing his name. She never filed a lawsuit or wrote a tell-all. But in private, she kept the story alive. Not as a grudge, but as a record. Because she knew there would be others. Other women. Other careers halted by the same kind of shadowy interference. And she hoped, one day, the silence would break. That one day, someone would name him for what he had done, not for the shows he created, but for the talent he buried. Now, at 93, Angie no longer whispers. She speaks clearly because the stakes no longer frighten her. Jack Webb didn't just cost her a role. He cost her momentum. He reshaped the arc of her life. She doesn't call it bitterness. She calls it memory. It wasn't only her. She knows that now. She has heard the stories over the years, in the quiet corners of industry parties and behind closed doors at award shows. Stories of other women who had said no and then vanished from casting lists. Some never returned. Others faded quietly, moving to smaller cities, changing careers, pretending they had never tried in the first place. But Angie stayed, not out of loyalty to the industry, but because she refused to let them erase her entirely. She reinvented herself. She returned in roles that carried less fanfare, but more depth. And over time, the world remembered why she mattered. Still, the wound remained. Not because she wanted a second chance, but because she deserved a first one that wasn't stolen. And this chapter of her story is not just about Jack Webb. It is about all the unseen forces that operate in systems built to protect the wrong people. Angie names him not to destroy his memory, but to reclaim her own. But her reckoning is not over. Because the next man wasn't just a controlling lover or a spiteful executive. He was someone who said he loved her more than life itself, and yet built a world where fear replaced affection, where love was used not as a comfort, but as a weapon. He didn't erase her career. He erased her safety. And that, Angie says, is a kind of betrayal no one ever sees coming. So who was this man? And how did he twist love into control so quietly that even Angie didn't see it happening until it was too late? And the obsession that masqueraded as love. There is a kind of love that isn't really love at all. It speaks with the voice of passion, dresses itself in devotion, and performs the part of care so convincingly that even the person being consumed by it can't see what it truly is. For Angie Dickinson, the most dangerous man in her life wasn't the one who bruised her heart or sabotaged her career. He was the one who watched her every move with adoration so intense it smothered her. The man who promised her forever, but built that promise on fear. His name was Larry King, and what he called love, Angie eventually recognized as a prison. When they first met, Angie was vulnerable. It was after her divorce, and the spotlight she had lived under for so many years was beginning to dim. She was tired, both emotionally and professionally, but still magnetic in a way that only true stars remain. Larry appeared at the perfect moment. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't a legendary singer or a mogul who ran studios. He was quieter, thoughtful, and seemed to understand the woman behind the image. He didn't pursue her with grand gestures. He simply listened. At that stage in her life, listening felt like love. In the beginning, it was easy to mistake his attention for comfort. He wanted to know everything: what she ate, how she slept, which directors she trusted. At first, she welcomed the closeness. After years of being with men who only loved her reflection, she thought she had finally found someone who saw the person beneath it. But Larry's love had rules. They started small. He asked her to check in when she arrived somewhere. Then he suggested she avoid certain co-stars. Eventually, he wanted to read every script before she could accept a role. He convinced her this was protection. He said the industry was cruel and only someone like him could guard her from it. Angie wanted to believe that. She began to feel how isolated she had become. Friends drifted. She declined invitations. He never forbade her, but always gave a reason not to go. If she laughed at a joke from a colleague, he would grow distant. If she smiled too long at someone, he would sulk. And every time she apologized, he would remind her how lost he'd be without her. He never yelled or struck her. He simply made her feel like love came with conditions. He turned devotion into surveillance. He observed her like an experiment, measuring every change in her tone. And when she did something outside his plan, he unraveled. Once, during a quiet argument, he slammed his head into a mirror and bled while whispering that she was the only reason he stayed alive. Angie didn't leave. Not because she didn't see it, but because she didn't have the words for it yet. Emotional abuse wasn't a conversation the world was having. If there were no bruises, no police reports, then people assumed you were fine. But she wasn't fine. She was shrinking. One afternoon, she discovered a hidden microphone beneath the seat in her car. When she asked about it, he didn't deny it. He said it helped him understand how she felt when she was alone. He called it intimacy. She didn't know whether to be afraid or heartbroken. She tried to leave, but each time she did, he would appear again, sobbing, writing letters, whispering about forever. It wasn't love, it was obsession. The moment she knew it had to end came after a missed phone call. She had been in a meeting, the kind that could have reignited her career. She returned home to find every photo of them destroyed, every journal torn apart. He stood in the middle of it all and said, "If I can't be in your life the way I need to be, I don't want to be in it at all." That night, Angie didn't cry. She lay awake and tried to remember the first moment she gave something away. Not her time, not her trust, but her ability to make choices without fear. And she couldn't find that moment because it hadn't come with thunder or warning. It had arrived slowly, disguised as care. The next morning, she left. No confrontation, no dramatic exit. She packed a bag, took Nikki, and disappeared into a small apartment without telling anyone. For weeks, she kept the blinds closed and the phone off. She needed to be alone, not just from him, but from the version of herself that had accepted such quiet devastation. Years passed. People asked why she had never shared the full story, why she hadn't spoken up earlier. She only said that sometimes you don't understand what happened to you until long after it ends, and by the time you do, you're too tired to explain it. Now, at 93, she no longer protects those who stole her light. She doesn't speak from revenge. She speaks from clarity. If she had seen the signs for what they were, she would have left sooner. And if someone else hears this now, maybe they'll find the strength to leave too. But Larry wasn't the final betrayal. That came not from a lover or a husband, but from a man who called her friend, a man who smiled beside her on stage, then whispered a sentence that shattered her dignity in front of millions. That man was Johnny Carson. He invited her onto his show to present her with a Lifetime Achievement Award. The stage lights were warm, the audience stood, the applause swelled. She stepped forward, ready to accept something she had earned. But before the moment could begin, he leaned in close, hugged her, and whispered, "I just saved you from being humiliated. Don't make me regret it." Earlier that day, he had been handed a clip, an outtake where Angie mentioned a now-disgraced producer she had worked with decades ago. The interview hadn't aired, but someone leaked it. Johnny buried it, not out of protection, out of control. He used the moment to frame her silence as virtue. To the audience, he praised her as a woman who knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. The crowd applauded. The camera caught her smile. But inside, she felt something break. After that night, her name disappeared from nominations. Calls stopped. Mentions faded. There was no scandal, no headline, just quiet exile. In Hollywood, stories don't need to be printed. They just need to be whispered by the right person. Angie never forgot. She carried it not with bitterness, but with memory. And now, finally, so will we. Angie Dickinson didn't ask for pity. She never needed headlines. But at 93, she chose truth over silence. She named names, not to wound, but to finally heal what decades of silence never could. These weren't just personal betrayals. They were lessons, warnings, and echoes of what so many endured without a voice. If her story resonated with you, share it. Let it be heard by those still afraid to speak. And if you believe more voices like hers deserve the light, subscribe now. We're not done. Because buried beneath Hollywood's glamour are stories the world was never supposed to remember.